Good evening. I'm Dr. George Philippides, the Chief of Cardiology at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. I would like to welcome all of you to tonight's Food as Medicine program. We appreciate your taking the time to join us and your ongoing support of our programs and of your community hospital, Newton-Wellesley Hospital. As a cardiovascular specialist who spends a lot of time working with patients to promote excellent cardiovascular health and to avoid cardiovascular disease, this program resonates with me. But you don't have to be a cardiologist or a cardiology patient to appreciate the importance of a healthy diet. Multiple studies on thousands of patients over many years have shown that good nutrition lowers the risk of developing diabetes and some cancers, boosts immunity, promotes healthy eyes, muscles, and bones, and helps us live longer. In fact, there are few things that each of us can do that are as impactful as adopting a healthy diet. And being able to cook a healthy meal at home is an important step in achieving that goal. I would now like to give an overview of tonight's program. We will start by hearing from the president of Newton-Wellesley Hospital, Dr. Errol Norwitz. We will then hear a presentation on optimal nutrition by Newton-Wellesley Hospital licensed dietitian Mary Heyer. We will then be treated to a cooking demonstration by Dr. Emma Steinberg and Chef Rick Barasano. We will have some time at the end of the program for a Q&A period with you, the audience members. Please note that attendees can submit questions into the Q&A feature throughout the program. And now I would like to introduce tonight's presenters. Mary Heyer, licensed dietitian. Mary's passion for nourishing your body with foods has spanned for over 3 decades. She has spent much of her time focusing on chronic disease risk reduction. She has practiced as a dietitian at Mass General Hospital, the University of California at San Francisco, and Yale New Haven Hospital. Her true passion is primary and secondary prevention of heart disease. Currently, she is the dietitian at the Newton-Wellesley Cardiac Rehab Program. Dr. Emma Steinberg is a board-certified pediatrician and a certified chef. She works as a pediatric hospitalist and teaching attending. For the last 7 years, Dr. Steinberg has taught culturally informed culinary medicine to medical trainees, patients, and staff across the country. She has also worked with community members, elected officials, schools, public health departments, and healthcare providers in the San Francisco Bay Area and across the country to advise on and implement programs to reduce food insecurity and improve health equity. Chef Rick Barasano, the executive chef at Newton-Wellesley Hospital, comes to us with 20+ years of culinary experience in restaurants, hotels, and eventually healthcare. He is excited and honored to embrace the mission of food as medicine, and we are very fortunate to have him quarterbacking our culinary efforts at Newton-Wellesley. It is now my pleasure to introduce the president of Newton-Wellesley Hospital, Dr. Errol Norwitz.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm very excited by the interest that this kickoff event has generated. And I'm even more excited by the potential for our Food as Medicine initiative to make a difference in people's lives going forward. This is a subject that is close to my heart. As the science shows, nutrition is one of the keys to preventing so many of the chronic health conditions that plague our families and communities today. Metabolic health has long been a passion of mine, and food is amongst the most powerful tools we have for transforming our health. I've seen the power in my own life and in my own family. Food as medicine is a shared value within my family. Last winter, I had the pleasure of being part of a smaller scale Newton-Wellesley event on the subject. My son Nicholas joined me to talk about food as medicine and to share some of the recipes from the metabolic health-based cookbook that he co-authored. It was wonderful to partner with him in promoting this important message. This evening's special event grows from the same vision of being a force for prevention and wellness across our surrounding communities. Here at Newton-Wellesley, improving the health and well-being of the communities we serve is one of our key strategic imperatives. To that end, promoting a positive food as medicine message and standing up educational sessions around metabolic health is one of our measures of success. As I've often said, this country's medical system excels at treating disease, but is far less effective at promoting health and wellness. Through our community initiatives, Newton-Wellesley is well positioned to lead a paradigm shift. Better health can begin today with what we eat. Please enjoy this evening's event, and thank you for being with us and for entrusting Newton-Wellesley with your care. And now we'll turn it over to Mary Heyer for the keynote presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Norwitz. I'm Mary Heyer. It's so exciting to be here to talk about food as medicine. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. When I think about food as medicine, a quote comes to mind. The doctor of the future will no longer treat the human frame with drugs, but will rather cure and prevent disease with nutrition. Thomas Edison said that in 1903. So why are we still, thinking about food as medicine as a new topic? I always think back to our culture, our food industry, what 3 ingredients we tend to find in foods that we might get out at a dining out: fat, sugar, and salt. So it's really hard to really shift our pattern of eating towards a healthier pattern of eating. It does work, scientifically backed. When I think about diet, it can have a positive effect or a negative. They've done this study multiple years in a row, and for the first time in ever, poor diet is now the leading cause of death and disability in the United States and worldwide. This is the Global Burden Disease Study. It not just looks at the United States, but 185 different countries. And in the most recent study that they did, diet surpassed tobacco smoking. 1 in 5 deaths can be related to a poor diet. 11 million people die from poor diet each year. So the time is now really important to really embrace food as medicine as a concept. When we look at other data in terms of poor diet and health, we know that less than 1% of children and 1.5% of adults meet the recommended dietary intake for fruits and vegetables. 60% of adults have 1 or more diet-related chronic diseases. 74% of Americans are living with overweight or obesity. 69% of ischemic heart disease deaths could be prevented if healthier diets were adapted. 1 in 3 Americans now have pre-diabetes. That's the percolating stage before type 2 diabetes develops. It is reversible. We'll talk about that coming up. 26.8% of adults over the age of 65 have type 2 diabetes, and 90% of those adults with diabetes are in that overweight or living with obesity category. Dietary factors affect colorectal cancer death. One food is not going to make the biggest difference to an unhealthy diet. So you can't pour olive oil over an unhealthy meal. It's really about inclusion of healthy foods when you're taking out and removing unhealthy foods. So food as medicine, if you want to sum it up, it does a lot of different things. One is if you need to maintain weight or attain a healthy weight, it's one of the best ways to think about losing weight. You can lower your cholesterol, your low density lipoproteins, or your LDL or triglycerides, hence reducing cardiovascular risk. You can lower blood sugar control or even improve how your insulin works in your body. That's improving insulin resistance. You can also lower risk for certain cancers, reduce inflammation. It supports an immune response. When I think of those two things, I even think in a COVID world, it's come to forefront the amount of systemic inflammation that played a role in COVID, and having a healthy immune response will reduce our chances of COVID. And when we think about, again, back to the cardiovascular risk, you can lower blood pressure, improve symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, slow neurodegenerative delay. So there's studies in terms of the MIND diet that slows progression of dementia and Alzheimer's. And no matter whatever factor you're thinking about in relation to food as medicine, better overall quality of life is one of my goals for every single patient of mine. If you feel better, you're going to be more physically active, you're going to have a better life and enjoy life. And ultimately, at the end of the day, having a good quality of life is essential. So someone might come to me and say, what kind of diet should I go on, Mary? And I always say, diet, 4-letter word. Diet perceives deprivation, elimination, restriction, reductionist. You might be completely removing one whole category of food It's usually short term. I go on a diet for 12 weeks and then maybe kind of bring back into old habits. And it's not always nutritionally adequate. So from a perspective of food as medicine, I love to talk about shifting your pattern of eating. When I think about that, that says, okay, let's include foods in abundance, fruits and vegetables. They're naturally low in calories. They're going to address weight loss goals. High in fiber. They're going to address food as medicine. If you shift your dietary pattern to a healthier pattern, it's going to be nutritionally adequate, not just for adults, but for children who are growing. It reduces risk factors for all chronic disease risk, and it's a lifestyle change, so it's long-term. So the yo-yoing back and forth from dieting to bringing other foods in, it's looking at chiseling away each day, bringing in healthy foods and enjoying it and changing your perception of how you're eating. Taste buds change. We will definitely embrace different styles of eating the longer we can sustain that, so a pattern of eating does that. What is a healthful diet pattern? It's one that really is focused on whole foods. I think one of the biggest things that's happened in America is our reliance on prepared foods, the dining out industry, and ultra-processed foods. If you think of over the last 20 to 25 years, we now have much more fast food access. We'd think nothing of going out to lunch multiple times a week, and we are bringing prepared foods into our homes much more than we did 20 or 30 years ago. They've done a lot of research on this, and they look at people's dietary score. They ask them, how many fruits and vegetables do you eat a day? Are you eating chips on a regular basis, sweets, desserts, alcohol, all these different things, and they come up with a dietary score. If you can be in the highest percentile of a high dietary score, you have an 80% reduction of developing heart disease or diabetes. You can lower your risk of stroke by 50%, and you can have an overall cancer reduction by a third. So when you think about it, you have to shift away from a standard American diet. I have the words SAD, sad, because it is sad. It's highly processed. Over the last 5 years, we've gone up to 58% of our foods from processed foods, 32% of them being from animal sources. Our discretionary foods, those are things like snacks, going down that middle aisle at the grocery store where all those unhealthy foods are. 40% of our diet are coming from those discretionary foods. We're not eating regular meals like we used to. And sadly, only 11% of that diet is based on whole foods, the ones that power and nourish ourselves. This is a huge undertaking to think about changing your pattern of eating, so you can do it in small steps. Data to show that. So just including 2.5 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day reduces your heart risk by 16%, stroke 18%, 4% for cancer, and a 15% reduction in premature death. When I think of those numbers, I look at the same data that might show you starting a low-dose hypertensive medication, a statin, metformin. So changing your diet can be just impactful as bringing some of these drugs on board or stave you off from having to bring drugs on board. So tonight, really what we're going to focus on is that shift away from the standard American diet towards a diet that includes more whole foods, less processed foods. There's a couple key points. There's so much information I could present tonight, so we're just going to go over a little bit of information in terms of really that shift. One is replacing saturated fat with healthy fats, bringing in more color, more fiber, and lastly, really reducing the added sugar, the refined carbohydrates, and sodium. The sugars and the refined carbohydrates, they act so differently in our body, and they really do fuel disease. So we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. So let's first off talk about using healthy fats in place of saturated fats. So you can see in this slide all the sources of healthy fats, anything from nuts and seeds to oils to avocados and fatty fish like salmon. When we think about including unsaturated fats, healthy fats in our diet in place of saturated fats, there's two types. One is polyunsaturated and the other type is monounsaturated. Both show benefits in terms of lowering your risk of coronary vascular disease, certain cancers, all-cause mortality, and stroke. When we think about polyunsaturated fats, essential. We need them. We need to eat them. They do lower our blood pressure. They reduce your LDL, that low-density lipoprotein, and triglycerides. And the wonderful thing about them that they can increase your HDL. Again, it's when you take out that saturated fat and eat them in place of them. They're anti-inflammatory, and they reduce thrombosis clotting. What does that mean? It doesn't make your blood as sticky. So obviously wonderful things to think about, including foods from polyunsaturated fat for doing that. The other source is monounsaturated fats. So They are things like olive oil. They lower cholesterol and LDL. They don't have the same effect that polyunsaturated fats have on our HDL, but they're also anti-inflammatory. So the key is really shifting away from saturated fat. So it's all about chemistry. So unsaturated fats have a couple open bonds. They're liquid at room temperature. Saturated fats are hard at room temperature. Primary sources of those are red meats, butter, cheese, and ice cream. You can see at the bottom, they are harmful, disease promoting. Partially hydrated oils, those are trans fats. They have been mostly taken out of the food supply, partly to the relationship to this study that we're looking at the slide right now. So they won't be in too many products. They are naturally occurring in animal products. So just by reducing saturated fat, you're automatically reducing those naturally occurring trans fats. At the top, you can see those beneficial polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. Omega-3s, those are those essential and omega-6s. We do need to eat them from polyunsaturated fats. Think salmon, fatty fish, those cold water fishes, wonderful sources of omega-3s. The omega-3 sources from plants, those are things like walnuts, flaxseed, chia seeds, adding a couple to your oatmeal. The plant-based omega-3s, those are things like our liquid oils. You want a combination of all of them. And if you think of monounsaturated, I mentioned olive oil, but also if you think of like almonds, peanut butter, natural peanut butter, avocados, those are good sources of monounsaturated fat. One thing we know from the monounsaturated fats too is they have a lot of different antioxidants in them and polyphenols, so that is part of the relationship in terms of why they are healthy. So in review, you want to be removing those animal sources, red meats, beef, lamb, pork, and veal are your red meats, anything that comes from those animal products, and shifting away from those towards these fats that are more healthy. I did mention ahead of time in this talking about this that saturated fats are hard at room temperature. So those tropical oils like coconut oil, palm kernel oil, those are all things we want to be shifting away from as well. When you think about shifting away from red meat, what things can you eat in terms of sources of protein? And so again, this is that another shift away from saturated fats that are unhealthy towards more healthy fats, choosing plant-based proteins that are naturally low in saturated fat and are high in fiber, isoflavonoids, and polyphenols, which again reduce oxidative stress in our body. Cold water fish, so that's a really good source of those omega-3s. A lot of times people are saying, why can't I eat poultry? You can. White meat would be lower than in saturated fat than the dark meat. But again, the shift is towards, can I bring in some of these plant-based proteins like beans, black beans, chickpeas, kidney beans, pinto beans. Think about, can I bring in some plant-based milks in place of cow's milk, or even using tofu, very different outside the box, but very healthy. And other sources would be like those nuts and seeds like peanut butter, natural peanut butter, or like an almond butter that doesn't have any extra fillings like saturated fats or sugars in them. So shifting towards those sources of protein can really help lower saturated fat. When we think about studies that show benefits, many have been done recently, especially over the last 5 years. If you replace 5% of animal protein with plant protein, you have a 50% lower risk of mortality. For every 1% reduction in saturated fat, there's a 2 to 3% reduction in coronary vascular disease. And a lot of times people will say, oh, I think I'm getting kind of old to change. I've been eating this way my whole life. Is it really important? And we've done looking at different age brackets. So for an average 60-year-old male, if you change from a typical diet like the American diet to an optimal diet, you can have a life expectancy increase of 8 years. And even at the age of 80, you could gain 3 years of life. Major changes, again, an optimal diet is really focusing in on getting those legumes and some of those plant-based proteins and really shifting away from meat, but it is possible. Every additional daily serving of red meat or processed meat increases risk by 13 to 20%. And men who reduced intake of red meat and processed meats especially, what are those? Bacon, sausage, ham, see a reduction in less prostate cancer, as well as colon cancer. Overall, high saturated fats diets are linked to heart disease, breast, prostate, and colon cancer, and also diabetes. While you're shifting animal sources, you want to be including an abundance of fruits and vegetables, the base of a healthy diet. Eat the rainbow, as they say. The more color, the more nutrients in something. When we think about fruits and vegetables, this is a tricky one though. So a lot of times people are like, I don't really like fruits and vegetables. Part of the reason is we might not have grown up eating them. So if someone says, I don't like spinach and kale, I'll say eat iceberg lettuce to get started. Then maybe in a couple weeks, as you start to change your palate, you'll throw in some baby spinach or baby kale. It's okay just to start with carrots and cucumbers. Super easy. Baby carrots, you don't even have to wash them at home. Just get started eating them. The deeper, the darker, the richer the color, the more antioxidants are going to be in vegetables, but they're all still health promoting. When you include more fruits and vegetables in your life, you lower your blood pressure. It has a positive effect on your blood sugar, and they're naturally low in calories, so you're promoting weight loss if that's your goal. You have a reduction in heart disease risk and stroke. You can lower certain types of cancers. We mentioned those before: breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. There's even information that shows adopting more fruits and vegetables in your life can have a lower reduction of eye issues and digestive problems. It can be done slowly. Again, small shifts, so 1 to 3 servings a day of including more leafy greens can reduce cognitive decline, colorectal cancer, increase bone metabolism, and reduce heart disease risk. Pretty powerful just by getting started by eating fruits and vegetables. When someone is eating a very well-balanced diet, including lots of fruits and vegetables, I challenge them to increase variety and diversity. To have a good, healthy microbiome, it's thought that you should be eating 30 different fruits and vegetables a week. So that's a challenge to those who feel that they're already eating really healthy, is increase diversity and variety. So that color thing, that color means antioxidants. Antioxidants reduce oxidative stress in our body. So if we can get more color, we're ensuring that we're getting the abundance of antioxidants that we need to have a healthy diet. So when I think about a tomato, I automatically think about the natural sources of lycopene in it: beta-carotene, orange and yellow fruits and vegetables. If I want you to increase your greens, one of the reasons is nitrates. All of these have wonderful health promoting benefits. And on the resource page on the website, you'll find more information about antioxidants, color, and really the effect they have. Lots of in-depth information that's too short tonight to go over. So when you increase your fruits and vegetables, you are automatically increasing fiber. Fiber is super important. We want 30 grams more a day. It's one of those foundations of a healthy diet, the base of a pyramid of what your diet should be looking like. And fiber comes from plants. Plants have structure, have fiber. Think all of the fruits and vegetables, things like oatmeal, nuts and seeds, whole grains, all great sources of fiber. When I think about fiber, you want to get 30 grams or more a day, but there's 2 different types: soluble, insoluble. Soluble fiber is really linked to health. When I think about soluble fiber, I think oatmeal. You add a little bit of water to it, it expands. It's viscous. It's almost pectin-like. It provides satiety. What's satiety? It makes you feel full longer, so it promotes weight loss. It slows digestion and has to be broken down. So if you have diabetes and you include good sources of soluble fiber, it's not going to increase your blood sugar as much as, say, white flour that's devoid of fiber. It reduces inflammation. It also reduces cholesterol levels. So you're saying, how's that happening? So when you include soluble fiber in your diet, way down in the lower intestinal tract, it traps bile acids. If those bile acids don't go back to the liver doesn't make cholesterol. They excrete through your bowel movement, which brings me to insoluble fiber. One of the biggest benefits of insoluble fiber is bowel health. All right, don't get me wrong, everybody wants good bowel health, and having good fiber in your diet will promote regular bowel movements. When you think about insoluble fiber, it doesn't all get digested. Some of it might pass through whole, say peas and corn. But anyways, you want a good source of soluble and insoluble fiber. One of the biggest sources of soluble fiber to include in your diet are those legumes again. I'm talking about, again, those plant-based proteins: beans, lentils, red lentils, green lentils, French lentils. Just get started. Hummus would be another good source of soluble fiber that sometimes is more palatable. Sweet potatoes, avocados. Insoluble, again, that roughage. Seeds, nuts, skins of fruits and vegetables. All plant sources have different types of fiber. Just start eating them like we've been talking about. The other essential role about fiber is the gut microbiome. And this is one of the most exciting things to me as a dietitian because it's really come about in the last probably 5 or 10 years. Your gut microbiome is being linked back to all chronic diseases, and what you eat influences the bacteria in your gut. So one of the ways to have healthy bacteria is by including fiber. It's a prebiotic. It provides the food that your bacteria are going to flourish on and create more healthy bacteria. Poor gut health is linked to all chronic diseases. And when I think about prebiotic fiber, a couple powerhouses come to mind. So those ones like garlic and onions and leeks and asparagus, those are even more promoting of healthy bacteria, but any fiber is really there. When you think about getting 30 grams or more of fiber a day, you're like, how do I do that? So at the bottom are once again are those plant-based proteins. Split peas, lentils, black beans, they would fall for, and about half of your amount of dietary fiber could come by eating just a cup a day. Starting the day off with oatmeal or even a whole bran cereal, just adding blueberries and raspberries to your cereal in the morning, shifting away from using plain pasta to whole wheat pasta throws in some fiber, and getting 2 to 3 cups of vegetables a day, or 2 to 3 servings of fruit a day is going to increase your fiber content. Also, those nuts and seeds, don't forget about them, or even air popcorn is a really healthy snack. So we want to be including those things as abundance. The other thing we want to be really thinking about reducing in terms of health risk is ultra-processed foods. So hence the slide, you can see what they are: sugary sweetened beverages, chips, snacks, fried foods, processed meats, candy. Again, what really the base of a standard American diet is based on, those sad things. Ultra-processed foods, they get the word ultra-processed just because they've been processed, they've been refined. They are high in sugar, sodium, refined carbohydrates, and they're very dense in calories. So when I think about sugar and refined carbohydrates, I think about how they act in the body. They're devoid of fiber, so they don't slow down our digestion. They get immediately absorbed. So they can increase your blood sugar very much. They can increase your triglycerides, increase disease risk. Sodium, one of the best things you can do if you have high blood pressure is reduce sodium. So processing of foods, it's not a bad thing. Think about the fact that we do have canned products in our pantry. Refrigerating types of foods, we don't have space in our refrigerator, so we do want to use some processed foods. It's these ultra-processed foods that we want to reduce. So they are low satiating, devoid of fiber. They often displace healthier foods in our diet. So we might grab that bag of potato chips instead of that side of baby carrots or a salad. They increase your blood sugar, as I mentioned. They increase that cholesterol, LDL, and triglycerides. They're linked to higher rates of obesity, partly in relationship because they're so calorically dense. They increase your blood pressure, inflammation, and oxidative stress. All things are going to promote chronic disease risk. When we think about ultra-processed foods, I mentioned a lot of them before, but the potato chips, pizza thing I didn't mention, all those little snacky ultra things that come from fast food restaurants, quick, easy, convenient, most often come in a bag or a box. We might stick them in the microwave really quick. Prepared foods you might get in a restaurant, again, they're coming with those sugars, the sodium, and mostly saturated fat. The higher the consumption of ultra-processed foods, the greater your risk. So what is a high consumption of ultra-processed foods? 4 servings or more. So when I think about servings, serving sizes are so small, so it's super easy to get 4 servings of ultra-processed food in your diet every day. The higher the number, 4 or more, the more disease promoting it would be. If you can reduce it, it's associated with a reduction in all-cause mortality. With a lower consumption would be 2 servings or less. For each additional serving of ultra-processed foods, your mortality risk increases by 18%. So you think, again, those serving sizes are pretty small, so you can increase your risk pretty quickly. So how do you tell what an ultra-processed food is? Sometimes it's just looking at a label. So this is really quick, and again, I'm going to have information on the website so you can dive deep a little bit more on your label at home. But the things we want to be reducing of are in red. So those are things like saturated fat, added sugar, sodium. So we want to be looking at a label that has 5% or less of those ingredients. If you want to be eating more of things, you want them in the green. So dietary fiber, obviously, because we just talked about the benefits of that. Or if you think of you want calcium and iron. So those you want 20% and more. The daily value is based on the dietary guidelines for Americans. So things that are high in a nutrient are 20% or more. Things that are low, 5% or more. If you wanted to ever find out how many teaspoons of sugar is in that bowl of ice cream that you're eating, look at the label. For every teaspoon of sugar, there's 4 grams of carbohydrate. So in this product, we take 10 and divide it by 4, and we see there's almost 3 teaspoons in 2/3 of a cup. That brings me back to number one thing you should be looking at a label, and that is serving size and servings per container. I'm victim to this all the time. I get home from work, I might sit down and watch Netflix, and all of a sudden I've eaten half the bag. I bought the product because it was low in saturated fat, but now I'm up 4 grams instead of 1. So it's per serving, the nutritional effects on it. Calories are super important, and so again, you can kind of keep in mind in terms of calories. So that's just a general overview. That tells you, again, sources of nutrients like fat and saturated fat. The other thing you can do to look at a label is ingredients. That'll immediately tell you if something's ultra-processed or more natural. If, say, you wanted to buy a whole grain bread, you'd want to look for whole wheat flour. You always want that word whole in front of the flour. Multi-grain bread, that just means there's only more than one grain. Doesn't necessarily mean if it's whole grain or not. So you always want to be looking at ingredients. Something's ultra-processed, it tends to have a long, dirty list of ingredients. If your grandmother's never heard of the ingredients, it's probably processed. 3 or less ingredients means it's less processed. So those are short tips. Again, that label guidelines will be on the website for you to look at in the near future. How do you get started? Obviously, eat more fruits and vegetables, but it's not as easy as that. So if you're looking for more information, you can look at different dietary patterns. We know that the Mediterranean diet, a DASH diet for hypertension, the MIND diet for Alzheimer's or dementia, plant-rich or just shifting towards more plant-forward thinking would be positive. Again, that positive versus restrictive approach is key. This is a lifestyle change that we're looking at in terms of food as medicine and reduction of risk. Say you're like, I don't even know, she's talked so much tonight. Maybe healthy swaps is where you're at. So you're going to start with that piece of toast tomorrow morning. Instead of using butter on it, maybe use some almond butter. Or the next time you go to the grocery store, think about getting some blueberries. Instead of adding cinnamon to that oatmeal, could you put some blueberries on it? So those are healthy swaps. Maybe you're like, okay, I know I can focus on breakfast, so take one meal at a time. So I say to my patients a lot, start with the easiest thing. So sometimes it's like just eating breakfast, getting a whole grain cereal and some fruit. Or if you're eating eggs, try a tofu scramble. Maybe it's shifting to once a week, I'm gonna be plant-based, meatless Mondays. So again, it's small steps. Maybe you're like one nutrient at a time. I'm like, I gotta get sugar out of my diet. I know it affects me. So again, be looking at labels for added sugar. Maybe you were just told you have high blood pressure. Maybe the one thing to focus on is reducing sodium in products. Whatever you choose to do, make sure it's SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. We are not looking for perfection. Again, we have lifestyle changes, not a diet. So progress. So something small. To leave tonight and say, I'm gonna eat healthy, I'm gonna embrace everything Mary said, it's unrealistic, it's unattainable. So start small, specific. So this week, I'm going to make a grocery list. Next week, I'm gonna look at the pantry and see what types of added sugars are in the products I'm gonna look at. Don't go to the grocery store and read every single label, just go to the dairy section and look at the yogurts and look what added sugar is. Take one step at a time. Again, lifestyle, progression, not perfection. So I hope that someday in the near future, we will see prescriptions for food as medicine. They just did this amazing study that came out last month. They took a prescription for food. They gave diabetics a prescription to go to the farmer's market, and they studied them for 12 weeks. They lost weight, they had better blood sugar control, and they're gonna keep going. So I know that it's here. I know that each and every day you guys can embrace this and you will have further reduction in risk. It's a lot of information I've given tonight, so we're gonna talk a lot about it in the cooking demonstration coming up. There will be resources available on the website, recommendation for cookbooks, more further reading, that label guideline that I recommended. Also looking at Picture Your Plate, half vegetables, good source of lean protein, some whole grains, lots of more information to look for, and follow us because lots more in terms of the Food as Medicine initiative at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. Thanks again for letting me join you guys tonight. I hope it was informational. Now I'm so excited because it's cooking demonstration, and this is the key, how to make these recommendations into your daily life and put them into place.
Well, good evening. Hi, Emma. How
Hi.
are you today?
Good,
Or
how are
tonight,
you?
I should say. And good evening to all of you. Tonight, we're going to be preparing for you a winter squash quinoa bowl with a turmeric tofu and a sun butter vinaigrette. So we will jump right in, I guess.
Yeah, let's get started.
All right, unless there's anything you wanted to add about our ingredient list.
So as you can see, we have a really beautiful spread of produce for today. The goal really was to demonstrate a recipe that allows you to mix and match ingredients, add a lot more plants and whole foods into your diet, but also eat the colors of the rainbow at the same time.
So some of the fun ingredients that we have are very fall driven. We have some acorn squash, we have some organic tofu, we have some rainbow Swiss chard. We are going to be using some beets as well. And for this purpose you can use either raw or you can use pre-cooked. I picked up some love beets, they're called. They're a pre-cooked beet. Don't have a lot of additives in it, so it's one of the benefits. Obviously we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that the fresher it is, the better, because anything that is packaged is going to have extra, ingredients
Additives.
words that I can't pronounce that she may be able to pronounce. One of the fun things that we're going to find out tonight is I work in commercial setting, and she was a commercial chef at one point, but she does a lot of home cooking, and sometimes the techniques are a little bit different. So Emma's going to call me out when I go a little bit off the rails.
And one of the things that I really like to say too, as someone who is thinking about cooking at home, especially with busy schedules and lots of things to manage, is that items like pre-cooked beets can help save a lot of time. And so for a busy work week or weeknight, it can be a really great way to add in a colorful and really delicious piece of produce, but save you quite a bit of time.
Phenomenal. So as you see, we have everything laid out here, and one of the tricks that we do in commercial kitchens that hopefully you should bring into your home is a term that we use called mise en place, which means everything in its place. And one of the biggest struggles I think home cooks have is timing.
Definitely.
So in order to streamline your timing and make sure that something's not burning in the oven while you're trying to get something out of the cabinet is to have everything set up and ready to go at your fingertips. All right? So now that we have that said, let's dig into it.
Let's do it.
All right. So timing wise, you're always going to start with something that takes the longest to cook, i.e. this case is going to be the acorn squash. So that is what we're going to prep first. Acorn squash is a winter squash. It is very hard when you cut it, and sometimes it rocks, right? So this is where I actually give a little technique, a little pro tip, is when you're using a knife, okay, there's three ends. There's the tip, there's the middle, and then there is the end. And the end is where you're going to cut hard produce like carrots and acorn squash, all right? And one of the tricks too is we call it blading up, or choking up on the knife, and it stops the knife from spinning in your hand. If you were to try and do it like this, you're going to make yourself pretty tired pretty quickly, and the knife might twist and it might hurt yourself. The other thing that I do when I'm cutting something hard like acorn squash is I do put a towel over the tip. The reason being is at any point in time this knife could slip up, and the towel will protect your hand from getting a nasty cut.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so to start, we're going to find the most solid part. All right, I'm going to go right down the edge here. I'm going to take my knife and just split it in half. Okay, gorgeous.
One of the things that's also really helpful is that Chef Rick's knives are really sharp. So dull knives actually are more injury prone. You will be more injury prone with a dull knife. So one thing that I would really encourage you to do is go to your local hardware store or invest in a tool for home for you to be able to keep your knives nice and sharp. So that slipping that Chef Rick was talking about, you'll decrease that with a nice sharp knife. And like most things in nature that are round, whenever you're cutting things, just like Chef Rick was saying, try to find the flattest surface to make sure that it's stable and doesn't move around.
Excellent.
One thing we forgot to mention is that you so excellently preheated our ovens.
Oh yes, we preheated the ovens. That's for step one in being your recipe, is to preheat the oven to 350 degrees is what we're using tonight, all right? Okay, so now we have the acorn squash. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the seeds out of the acorn squash. You use a spoon, all right? And basically you just twist it around.
And people really only think about pumpkin seeds as something that you eat, but any squash seed, any winter squash seed is an awesome way to add a super, super healthy plant-based fat and lots of fiber. Also, most of this produce you buy by weight, and so that includes the seeds, so you might as well use the seeds because you're paying for it anyway. And I really like to scoop them out and roast them at the same time because it's just the one set of prep, one set of cooking, and they last really great in an airtight container on the counter. And it's a great way to involve your kids if they want to incorporate other seasoning or things, or even help with the spoon scooping out the seeds. And you can see these are much less slimy than pumpkin seeds if you're carving a pumpkin. And so for anyone who has some textural concerns, this will be much less goopy than an actual pumpkin.
I agree, and we're coming into that season, aren't we?
Yeah.
So if you do or do not celebrate Halloween, you're going to be carving pumpkins shortly.
Save those seeds.
Save those seeds. And a little side note too. So we will be putting our dishes in a bowl, but if you wanted to up your flair, you could actually save one of the acorn squashes that you roasted out and put the quinoa mixture in here, and then instead of cutting up the acorn, they can just scoop it out and eat it as a bowl.
Yeah,
All
beautiful
right.
For your holiday table if you want. Nice centerpiece if you want to have more of a plant-based option on your holiday table.
Absolutely. So now, as we are talking about healthier options, we are going to forego the oil, salt, and pepper on the acorn squash because it does have a beautiful flavor naturally. And when I do my acorn squash, I actually place it face down onto the board because it does, onto the pan because it does one of two things. One, it caramelizes on the bottom, and two, it kind of steams the inside. The natural juices will waft up and steam the squash. So we're going to put that in the oven.
Yeah, that's perfect. One thing you may not have noticed is that Chef Rick has a piece of parchment paper on this cookie sheet. If you don't have parchment at home, that's totally fine. You can use foil, you could use a silicone baking mat. You don't actually need anything, but it just helps make cleanup much easier and simpler.
You got it. All right, into the oven we go.
And the nice thing about all of these things that we're roasting, it's all the same temperature, and so you don't have to make any changes. You just sort of continuously throw the things in for the different amounts of time. So there's a little bit of, timer management that you need to work out, but at least you don't have to adjust the oven temperature so much.
No. And so the beauty of this is going to take about 35 minutes, which we'll continue to cook on, and we'll prep the rest of it as we go. The next thing we're going to get started is the quinoa. I have a measuring cup here. Emma, would you mind putting 2 cups of water into that?
Absolutely.
We'll just use this behind.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'm going to play with this to get it fired up. So we have a couple of different types of quinoa, and quinoa, people think that actually quinoa is a grain. It's not. It's actually a seed. And it's one of those fun facts that a lot of people always say, oh, quinoa is a grain. They always called it like an ancient grain, and it's an ancient Aztec grain technically, but when you look at it, it's actually a seed. All right, and then we have some Earthly Choice that I picked up at Stop and Shop.
Yep.
And you picked up some lovely
tricolor
quinoa, and it comes in all different colors. There's red, there's black, there's the white. We're just using a simple white this time.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we got the water going. You're going to hear a little hum. This is an induction burner, which will heat up the water a lot quicker. It runs off a magnet. Or you might be cooking on electric or a gas at home. But you're basically just boiling water.
Yeah, and the nice thing is any whole grain or seed will work here too. So if you had farro, bulgur, even brown rice, if you wanted to, again, you can mix and match, and all of these things can be pre-cooked in a larger volume, and then you can portion it out to use in different recipes, so you only have to make it once.
So one of the tricks that we do also in the restaurant world is we will rinse our quinoa or our grains for 2 reasons. One, it takes the extra starch out so it's not as gummy, and 2, it gives you a chance to see if there's any foreign objects inside the grain, which could happen, right?
Yes, and I will admit, as a home cook, even though this is something that is common not only in commercial kitchens but in cultures across the world, to rinse your grains, I don't actually rinse my grains at home. Part of that is because I actually like the sort of starchy nature of the grains, but also I like to save time. And you'll see induction burners are super fast.
Super fast.
Which is really nice.
I'm going to throw that in there.
Perfect. Yeah, just give it a stir.
Quick stir.
The other thing is, so we're using water here. If you have a vegetable stock at home or save your vegetable scraps and make your own stock, it's another great way that you can add flavor and get a little bit more bang for your buck out of the produce that you have at home. I often leave a Ziploc bag in my freezer to keep some of the scraps for vegetable stock. So ends of carrots, onion leaves, or skins, other things like that, edges of celery, any other little pieces that are great, and you just boil it in water and can keep it around in your fridge or freezer for adding more flavor.
Beautiful. All right, so we boiled it, now we turn it down, it's going to simmer, it'll come back up to a simmer. As you can see, it's slightly getting active. While we're doing that, we're going to prep the rest of the goods. We are going to drain the tofu next because that might take a little bit of time. So we have some organic tofu here, okay, and realistically all I do is I cut the package open, and you can see there's a lot of water. I'm using an extra firm tofu for this recipe. There are different grades and different firmnesses of tofu that you need to be aware of, and they all have different purposes.
Yeah, the extra firm can be great for people who are trying tofu for the first time and tend to be sort of more meat eaters. That texture can be pretty similar. I now prefer more of a firm tofu, but the extra firm is really nice, especially if you're sort of manhandling it a little bit and sort of tossing it or having it in the oven, just because it will be sturdier and can hold up to a little bit more of that physical.
What we're about to do for today. So, all right. Now, if you are sauteing or frying your tofu, it's important that you press it because the amount of water that is inside tofu could cause a problem when you apply it to oil. So you never get that splatter when you put something in a saute pan. It's because of the moisture or the water is coming out, mixing with the oil, and they don't like each other. And all of a sudden, you have a splatter, and somebody could get hurt. Right? But since we're roasting it, we're going to keep a lot of the moisture in to help with the texture later on. So the way that I prepare my tofu for this application is you have the 14-ounce block. I cut it in half lengthwise, okay? And then I put it on the pan whole, as is, and I believe you were saying that you like to do this with
Yeah, you can even
kids.
use a butter knife here because the tofu is really nice and soft. And so if you have kids at home that you want to involve in the prep process, this is a great opportunity to have them get involved, get more comfortable with using knives and interacting with some of these ingredients. So yeah, this is an awesome and with the rub that you're about to do too, awesome opportunity to involve your kids or young people in your home.
Absolutely. So now I have some dry thyme here, or you can use fresh, and some turmeric, all right? Fun fact about turmeric, it actually is related to ginger, all right? So I'm actually going to mix these two together. You can use your hand if you want, but I recommend you be careful with turmeric because in the old days they used it to dye clothing. And if you get turmeric on anything, it is going to stain yellow and it's going to stay yellow for a very long time. All right, so if we mix the thyme and turmeric together, and then basically I just sprinkle it over as it's whole already.
And the other thing you can do here is if you don't have thyme or if you're using fresh thyme, you could use another hardy herb in place also. So something like rosemary or sage would work really well. And one thing just to say is that if you are using dried, I tend to use a little bit less than I would of the fresh, just because it packs a little bit more of a punch. And then in terms of storing herbs, so oftentimes I know people are hesitant to buy herbs, but they're a huge source of phytonutrients and are really, really great to add to recipes. So I highly, highly encourage you to buy fresh or grow your own. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people started growing their own scallions and other herbs. So this is a really fun opportunity for you to potentially do that too. I store my extra herbs actually in the freezer. They'll store really well if you put them in a tiny bit of oil, but I also have stored them just straight up in a sealed package. And just like Chef Rick was saying, you can see the yellow stain from the turmeric, but it's great. And this is another opportunity if you want to add other seasonings or flavors to a dry rub, something that your family likes, definitely feel free to do that. And this rub will work really well on other sources of protein. Also, if you wanted, it could be mixed into beans. You could put it as a dry rub on fish, or even on chicken. So lots of different options here if tofu is not your thing, but definitely a fun way to try more plant-based proteins.
And I did recently, I've worked with turmeric for many years. I didn't realize all the health benefits.
Oh, tons.
Yeah?
Yeah, huge anti-inflammatory. Yeah, it's great.
So I'm actually going to rearrange this for a second, because what we are going to do is we're going to cut the beets. Although we already have the beets, they're already cooked and roasted, we want to make sure that they heat up as well. The tofu and the beets will heat up around the same amount of time.
And that's just another way to add a little bit more flavor. So just like Chef Rick was talking about having the squash caramelized, this is another way. So even though the beets are cooked, adding a little bit more heat will help caramelize some of the natural sugars in those beets.
Okay.
Beets are another thing that stain. So.
Yes. So I brought a second cutting board out because this one will be a little easier to clean. And so we already have our roasted beets. We're just going to dice them up into a 3/4 inch, all right? And we'll demonstrate some knife skills here. Again, beets are round, right? So one of the best things to do is to find a flatter spot if you can, but you create your own flat spot, all right, by slicing down, all right? And then I have a nice flat area that I can work with. Same thing. Do that.
And just watch how Chef Rick is holding his fingers too, getting his fingertips out of the way to help protect them.
It's called the claw, and my son's favorite game is to play claw at home, so this is just one of those things that will translate. So as you see, because the beet is softer, I'm using the tip of the knife, right? It's a lot easier to use. And then I'll just spread them out over here on the board as we go.
And with pre-cooked beets, Chef Rick's son could definitely help with some of that cutting there too. Having a sharp knife is great, but in this case you also could use a plastic knife or a plastic serrated knife that is more kid-friendly, again, if you wanted to involve your young people in the prep process.
All right. So we'll speed this up a little.
And again, you'll see every time Chef Rick is making sure that he's having a flat surface of the item to make sure that it's as safe as possible. And really, we just want to have even-sized pieces because that way it will cook evenly. And it's nice later because then it's bite-sized and then you don't even have to do more work when you're eating it. And again, you can see, look at these beautiful colors. We've got the bright, vibrant yellow. We've got the deep red purple. So already as we're prepping, even just for seasoning and adding the different components, we're eating the colors of the rainbow.
So I'm going to wipe that down, and we're going to immediately put this in the sink. But as you could see, the beet stain. All right, so now that we have this prepped, this is going to go in the oven. And after that, we'll check on our quinoa just to give it a stir every now and then. If you can see that, cooking away nicely.
Yeah, and I like to call it sort of like the ear. You can see the little sort of, maybe like right here. I don't know if you can see that. That piece of the quinoa is starting to sort of separate, and that's one of the signs that you know that the quinoa is cooking.
All right, so let that continue to do its thing. And while we're doing that, now we're going to prep our Swiss chard and get that soaking, because that'll be the next thing that takes a little bit of time. I'm going to steal some from over here.
Yeah, that's great. So Swiss chard is also in the beet family, which is one of the ways that it gets the beautiful, vibrant colors. Leafy greens are a really, really awesome and powerhouse nutrient dense item to incorporate into any of your meals or snacks. I particularly like chard because of the color, but also because the stems are really, really delicious and pretty tender, and so we can use those also. And I find that I don't have to cook them quite as much as something like a kale stem, which is also edible and really delicious. But these are just super beautiful.
Yeah, and so ironically, we're actually not even going to cook the chard today.
Yeah.
Right? And we're going to show you basically how to cut it down so that it is, you can eat it almost like celery, as we discussed.
Amazing.
Right? So one of the things you do is you cut the ribs out, all right, and hold that to the side. And hold your leafy greens.
And one of the fun things you could do with your kids as well is if you didn't want to use a knife here, you can just hold the stem and pull the leaf. I don't know if you want to model that. Yeah, I find that one's a little big. Yeah. But you can pull it off the rib as well too. So another great way to involve your kids in the process.
All right. So as we do this, we're just going to keep the stems separate. All right. And we can do that again. We'll do it one more time. And part of the reason too is this one, it also gives you a chance when you're doing it that way to see if there's any damaged spots that you need to get rid of that you don't want to use. All right. What we're going to do here is first we'll cut up the leafy part. We'll grab our little salad spinner.
Yeah, so
Thank
this
you,
is,
Emma.
No problem. This is a great way that I find for home cooks to wash any green. So have your salad spinner or something similar where it's like a colander inside of a bowl, and you'll just toss them right in, and then we'll show you how to rinse them so that it's really, really easy and very contained.
All right. So basically we want to get 1 inch to 3/4 inch ribbons off of here because we're going to cut them into cubes. Basically a rule of thumb, like salads or any green like this, is that you want it to fit on the fork, right? So you don't want somebody struggling if they're eating a quinoa bowl because they're not going to go in and they're not going to be able to cut their char like I am here, okay? So we cut them into ribbons first, and then we just give them a chop.
And it can be a little bit hard with something bushy like a green. So you'll see Chef Rick is sort of squishing the greens together to hold them to have it be a little bit more contained. That way he's not trying to cut across the entire cutting board.
All right, so we're going to put those in the spinner. And because we like to use everything,
Yep.
okay, much like celery, when you get celery from the store, there's going to be the end that you need to kind of trim off. So we'll trim off the ends first. And then what we'll do is, again, lay it over so it's flat, okay? And then what I'll do is I'll cut this on what's called a bias, right? And knives don't cut very well when you just push, all right? Knives have to slide, which is why you'll see professional chefs use what's called the rock. And that rock is what promotes sliding through. So you can see I can use just 2 fingers and it'll slide through. And then that's the rock.
The other thing that's nice about the rock is it actually uses less effort, so your arm won't get quite as tired. So one of the things that I often teach people who are getting more comfortable with knife skills is think about keeping the tip of the knife, that nose, on the cutting board, and mindfully make sure that that is staying on the board, and that can sort of help you transition into more of a rocking motion.
And for some reason, everybody likes the show of the rocking and cutting. And I don't know, a lot of the cooking shows you see that.
Oh yes,
Everybody wants to
definitely.
show off their knife skills.
Knife skills are really important. It definitely does make it easier for prep and for cooking stuff at home. I find that when people have sharp knives and learn the choking up technique that Chef Rick was talking about earlier, they often are feeling much more comfortable to be able to do all of the prep and cooking at home because it does actually take a lot less work. It's a lot less fatiguing. But also at the same time, again, if you try to batch cook, so if you're using this for multiple recipes throughout the week or repurposing the ingredients, then you don't have to worry about sort of chopping every single day. You can just chop, say, once or twice a week, which really helps.
Perfect. Yeah, we try and practice that in professional kitchens as well. If you're cutting tomatoes for one thing and
Yep.
you need it for multiple items, cut them all at the same time. Saves yourself time. It's starting to sneak up on me, but you can see I have a towel underneath my cutting board. So one of the things to stop the cutting board from moving around to make it safer is to either put a wet towel or to get, a rubber footed cutting board. And as you notice, I always keep my cutting board clean. All right? Clean your cutting board, clean your knife. Keeps everything neat and organized.
And safe.
And safe. All right, so at this point, we're going to spin or rinse and spin.
Yeah, I will show
This is
you
her
how
handy
I
dandy
like.
little thing.
Yes. So hopefully you can see
Oh.
over here. So I just fill it with water, and as I'm filling it, I sort of zhuzhed the greens around, and you'll see oftentimes, even as you're sort of shaking the greens around, that you'll start to see some grit in the water. So then the nice thing is you can just take this out, and I don't know if you can see this here, but you can see there's a little bit of debris in here, so that's what we're trying to clear. And I just do this 3 or 4 times. And this works for herbs too, so big leafy greens, herbs, anything. Anytime I'm getting these items from the grocery store too, I tend to, especially herbs, try to just do this right away. Just to, that way that prep is all done. All right, I lost
right.
1 leaf.
Thank
Apologies.
you. That's right, all right. We always make extra. So I know one of the jokes at home is I don't know how to cook small. So, and then the next thing we're going to do while everything is cooking is we're going to make our vinaigrette. Okay? So people will say, why is there no oil? Well, this is, we're using the natural
nuts,
oils
yeah.
from the nuts.
Yeah.
Okay? We're using a sun butter, which is a sunflower seed. Okay? Right over here. And you can find it right in your local grocery store. It's usually in the peanut butter aisle. It's a beautiful peanut butter substitute if you have an allergy to nuts. So that's kind of where we went with it as well. And then in addition to that, you could make this out of almonds, you can make it out of walnuts, you can make it out of anything.
Yeah.
Pistachios.
Oh, great idea. Yeah, cashews, peanuts.
Cashews.
Yeah.
The macadamia nut, my favorite. So we're going to get a bowl and a whisk.
And one thing just to say really carefully, so labeling on these items can be really challenging. And so unlike an item like quinoa where there's just one ingredient of quinoa, or tofu like we've talked about before, this is definitely something, whether it's sunflower butter or any type of nut butter, where I always look at the label. And I know that you heard from Mary earlier, there's a few different places to look. So you can see here on the nutrition facts part, it says 0 grams of added sugar. So that's really great. And then the other place you can look is in the ingredient list. So I always like to look on ingredient lists and try to pick items that have 5 ingredients or fewer and make sure that they're all items that I can identify and pronounce. And so here you'll see right here, it just says organic roasted sunflower seeds. So there's no added sugars, no added oils or anything. So definitely be careful when you're looking at these things. Or like Chef Rick said, you can just use a whole nut or some other seed in the meantime. Do you want me to pass you?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd
Sure.
be great. So we'll start off with the sun butter. The reason why this vinaigrette is so easy is you can literally just put everything in the bowl and mix it together, okay? If you were using a whole nut like almonds, you would want to toast those first and then run them through a food processor if you have one, or a stick blender, or even a blender to get it to a creamy consistency. But since this one was already out of the jar, we're just going to go with that. So this is a 1/2 cup of the sun butter.
And the nice thing about the nuts is if you wanted to toast them at the same time as the seeds from your squash, you totally could do that. If you have a toaster oven at home, I recommend 275 for about 15 minutes and shake it frequently to make sure that they don't burn. And that's a really great way. You can store those nuts just like the seeds toasted, so you can add them for crunch or texture to any of your dishes, and lots of awesome nutrients in those, especially walnuts with omega-3s, tons of fiber in nuts and seeds, plus the awesome texture.
And they're really tasty.
Yes,
So,
and delicious.
as with every vinaigrette, you need some sort of acid, so we're using lemon juice, fresh lemon juice in this, all right? So a little bit of lemon juice.
And if you really like that sort of citrusy flavor, definitely feel free to use a zester and zest some of the lemon zest also. That adds more of the color. There's tons of nutrients in the peel of the lemon also. So another great way to add some more color, some more nutrients, and delicious flavor.
Could you pass the salt and pepper, please?
Salt and pepper, absolutely.
All right, so we're going to add about a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder here. This is actually granulated garlic. We're going to add a cinnamon to kick up the fall flavor a little bit. All right, a pinch of salt, not a lot because there's a lot of flavor in that sun butter, and some black pepper.
And again, here's an opportunity for you to mix and match. If you didn't have lemon juice, you could use apple cider vinegar. Or if you didn't have cinnamon or didn't like cinnamon, you could add nutmeg or clove or some other type of warming spice to it as well. Again, whatever you have around, whatever flavors you like. And with any vinaigrette or dressing, I really like to actually make it in a jar. And that way I can just toss it right in the fridge. And then use it in the future for any type of thing. So if I had another block of tofu, for example, I could marinate the tofu in this vinaigrette, or use it as a marinade for another type of protein also, or sort of thin it out and use it as a sauce for a stir fry or something like that too. Again, one sauce or vinaigrette or dressing that you're using in multiple different ways, and to aid with cleanup, you can just put it in the jar that you're going to store it in.
All right, so again, if you don't have a food processor or a blender or something at home, you just need a simple bowl and a whisk. All right, and what I'm putting in now is a little bit of water to thin it out, to add it to make it to the consistency so you can drizzle it. Okay, but trust me, the flavors will still be there. All right, and the beauty is you can always add more. Right, so that's one of the things we talk about with salt or seasoning. You can never take it out once you put it in, but you can always add more. All right, so you can see the color is changing from that richer brown to a nice kind of lighter brown and creamy tan. All right,
almost looks like tahini in some
ways.
That sesame seed paste.
Okay, and maybe just a little more so it's, we can drizzle
more
it.
Drizzle, yeah,
more
nice.
Drizzle. And then that'll be that. And we have all the ingredients at this point in time put together. Oops. Well, you know what they say, if you didn't make a mess, you didn't do it right. All right, so how's that look to you, Anna?
That looks great. The other thing, just like Chef Rick was saying, in terms of it's always easy to add more, but it's hard to take it away, is that's one of the benefits of tasting along the way. And so if you wanted to dip a piece of green in there, or if you have a spoon, that's one of the things that I really like. I actually like using something that I'm going to be putting it on. So if I'm making a salad dressing, I grab some of my salad and dip it in. That way I'm sort of tasting it all together. But an old-fashioned spoon doesn't hurt.
Nope. And if you're worried about sharing the spoon, then an easy trick that we use in the kitchens is you use 2 spoons. You take one. One spoon is for the ingredient, and the other one goes in your mouth.
And I still do that at home. I use that technique all the time.
Would you care to try?
Oh, sure. Always. All right.
There we go.
Ooh, yum. Super flavorful.
That'll work.
Ooh, I love the warming of the cinnamon at the end. That's delicious.
It's on the back, right?
Yeah, it'll be great.
So we're going to set this aside, and we are almost ready to assemble. Emma, I just realized something.
What?
We forgot an ingredient.
Oh.
Because I wasn't reading the recipe. I was doing it from memory. Right?
Is it the
maple syrup? So we're going to go back in, and we're going to add a little bit of maple syrup.
It was delicious without it. So again, this is another sort of point to say, taste along the way, right? If this is to your taste and you don't feel like you need it, you don't necessarily need to add it. But the maple syrup will add a little bit of sort of fuller body and a touch of sweetness. You don't need a lot. And again, this is another situation where you really want to read the label carefully. So if you are adding a little bit of natural sugar from an agave or a maple syrup, just make sure it says 100% and pure. And you can look in the ingredient list just to sort of make sure.
All right.
And then maybe after we mix this, do you want to talk about the toasted pumpkin seeds?
Yes, we do. We do want to talk about those. So had you saved your seeds and toasted them, at that point they would be in the oven right now cooking with the rest of the ingredients. But you can also pick up toasted pumpkin seeds right in the supermarket. You know, I picked these up again at Stop and Shop, okay? Or whatever local market you want to. These are salted, so
Yeah, just be careful.
just be careful
Maybe
of the
use
sodium
less,
content.
Yeah, less salt in the other aspects of your dish.
But you can also find them raw, right? And these ones we already toasted. I toasted these ahead of time, so you can see the difference in the color, okay? And realistically, you just want a light golden brown, and as you toast these, although it's a seed, it's going to have a nutty smell, and that's going to let you know that they're done, and they'll get nice and crispy. All right,
Delicious.
so pumpkin seeds.
And you can do that on the stovetop if you want, if you're bold. I find that it doesn't get that sort of nuttiness all throughout the same way as if you are toasting them or roasting them in the oven or in a toaster oven. But if you don't have an oven easily accessible or a toaster oven, then on the saute pan over medium-low heat, should be totally fine.
Just keep it moving. Don't
Yes.
let it stop. I did, while you were demonstrating the Swiss char, I did turn off the quinoa because it is ready.
Awesome.
So, and much like any other grain or rice that you do at this point in time, you would give it a little fluff. All right?
Look at that. Gorgeous. So yummy.
Okay, and then we are ready to plate as soon as that acorn squash is ready.
Amazing.
All right, let's put that over here on this.
And for the plating, just because we have a little bit of time while the acorn squash is cooking, this is a great opportunity for your family to be able to DIY. So if you have some people who like certain ingredients or more of one thing, less of another, you can just lay out all of the ingredients for them to be able to put a bowl together that's to their liking. That way you can all make things yourself. The other thing that's great is as you're doing the prep or sort of shopping, you can think with your kids or your family members, what are the different types of things we would want to put in this type of bowl or other things and get them involved. I find that oftentimes if kids are involved all throughout the process, even during the meal planning and shopping process, they're more willing to try new things. And especially if they get their hands dirty, they definitely are excited about trying their own thing that they made. But this is really, really nice way, again, to be able to accommodate people's tastes and preferences.
Perfect. All right.
Should we assemble?
We should assemble.
Okay, let's
All
do
right.
it.
The squash is going to be a little bit firmer than we would normally like at this point, but to move things along, we're going to assemble. We're going to grab some bowls.
And this would be another situation where, say you are cooking for yourself or just one or two people at home, this serves more than that. So if you wanted to also assemble in, say, like a glass Tupperware or some other Tupperware for bringing lunch to work or portioning out for another meal later in the week, you can do that all at once now here too. So that's the last sort of piece about batch cooking too, is you can portion it out. And all of these ingredients will, aside from the raw greens, will freeze really nicely. And so I really, really like also this type of dish because you can store a lot of it if you have extra and you don't think that you'll use it in the freezer for future use. And that reminds me actually that for nuts and seeds, because they are such a great source of fat and healthy fat, that if you store it at room temperature, it has a higher risk of going rancid or having that sort of bitter taste.
Correct.
If you're not going to eat it within the sort of first few days, maybe a week. And so for any of those items, aside from, say, a nut butter, but a whole nut or some of the seeds, I actually store them in the freezer. And I find that that helps extend the shelf life, but also allows me to buy a little bit more, which helps decrease the cost because things like walnuts can be a little bit more expensive.
They can be pricey, absolutely.
But they are delicious and super nutrient dense.
All right. So, watch your hands. We're going to put that out. All right.
Amazing.
And
We're going to see all of our colors come together. Really beautiful.
pretty quickly. What I am going to do is I'm going to put these back here.
Oh, good idea.
All right.
So we've got our green, we've got oranges, we've got yellows, we've got reds. So that's another fun thing you can do with your kids is basically give them a challenge, try to get as many different colors on their bowl, on their plate in the prep process as possible.
I don't know if you could see it. Oh, it just stopped. There was some bubbling going on here coming out from the bottom of the squash, which is the steam. So for this, we're going to show you two techniques. All right.
Oh, look at that nice
See the
caramelization.
caramelization going on.
Yeah, right here. This is what Chef Rick was talking about, which is really nice. So anytime these items get good contact with a metal pan that then heats up without moving it, that allows for that really beautiful caramelization.
Okay. If these had cooked a little longer, you would have been able to peel the skin right off, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little technique almost like if you were using a melon.
Oh, yeah, cool.
All right. And what I'm actually going to do is for this, I'm going to cut it in half. Again, put it down flat, right? Cut it in half there, and then I'm just going to score it.
Yeah, or some people cut avocados that way too.
Mm-hmm. Just be careful because it is hot.
Yes.
And I guess one of the benefits of having cooked for years
Yep.
is you
Your
kind of,
finger pads are.
I don't want to say you lose feeling, but you do. You kind of lose feeling in your fingers.
And the skin is actually edible, so if you do like it and you don't mind the little bit of texture, you certainly can eat the skin. And here's also an opportunity where you potentially could use a spoon to scoop it out.
Yeah,
also.
so we can do both if you want. Since you mentioned that, we can cut this one with the skin on.
Just add more color, add more fiber.
Okay.
Look at that. Beautiful.
If you're not liking the skin, then you can just do what I did there. And as she said, we'll take a spoon. Here, we'll hold it with a towel. I don't want to set a bad example. All right? And then you just kind of scoop it out as if you would an avocado or a melon.
And this is something where if you wanted to make it ahead of time, once it's cooled down completely, this is something that you could do super, super easily or have one of your kids or family members do.
Yeah. All right. So there we go. That was a little ugly, but that's okay.
It's all going to the same place.
So now that we
Awesome.
have the squash, all right, so to assemble, we're going to take, let's see, let's move these over here for a moment. You put your quinoa down. All right, so you just take a spoon, put your quinoa in on the base,
Beautiful.
okay?
And
Do a
again, we're
couple here.
layering flavors, layering textures, layering colors, lots and lots of delicious fiber and flavor throughout this whole dish, but also lots of flexibility.
From there, you're going to put a layer of Swiss chard down.
And the nice thing is, because the quinoa is still warm and the squash is still warm, the greens will likely start to wilt a little bit, which will be nice.
Yeah. We're going to add some beets.
Yeah, add that bright red.
Okay. And then I left the tofu whole, so would you mind cubing that
Oh yeah,
while I'm
absolutely.
doing this?
I'm just gonna.
Okay.
Is it okay if I cut it on the board?
Please.
All right, so I'm
That was the
gonna
whole point.
use the claw again. And again, because it's soft, we can just use the tip.
Okay. We'll do this one here has the no skin, and this one here has the skin. For the adventurous who like their skin. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. And from there, we're going to add our tofu.
Look at that. It smells so good. And you can see some yellow on the parchment too. One of the benefits of using something on your cookie sheet.
Absolutely. Okay.
Amazing. And then garnish with some seeds for crunch.
We're going to garnish with some toasted pumpkin seeds.
Beautiful.
And then the last thing we'll do is drizzle
The vinaigrette.
the vinaigrette. Okay.
Awesome. Yum. I can't wait to try.
Oh, what did I do with this one? That's right, we're going to use the same spoon here.
Beautiful.
And there you go. We have our roasted winter squash quinoa bowl with turmeric tofu.
We hope you enjoy.
Enjoy.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Before we jump into our question and answer period, I wanted to thank our presenters for a wonderful session. Dr. Emma Steinberg, Chef Rick Barisano, and licensed dietitian Mary Heyer. That was fantastic. So during the presentations, we received many, many great questions from you, the audience, on the Q&A function. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to all of the questions. So for those of you who post questions and want to find the answers, we have a fantastic website, which we'll be highlighting later. And we invite you to go to that website and obviously join us for future such sessions where we'll go over many of those things as well. So I'm now going to sort of start to field questions. And the first one is one that's near and dear to me. The question is, what tips do you have for meal planning, especially for busy working families? Dr. Steinberg, you want to field that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. So this is a really, really important question. So thank you for asking it, especially for me as a new mom. I think one of the things that is really, really helpful is trying to plan as much as you can in advance. So making a list, grocery shopping, sort of planning out your meals or how you're going to use your ingredients throughout the week. Chef Rick and I talked about batch cooking earlier, so that can be really, really helpful. So thinking about how to use the ingredients that you are preparing in multiple ways will save you a lot of time. And it's another opportunity with the picking out recipes and shopping in advance to involve your kids in the process too. Have them pick out recipes, have them be involved in some of the recipe and shopping process as well. And oftentimes what I'll say is pick one day of the week. One day of the week where you're doing all of that and you sort of think about it for the rest of the week. That way you don't have to scramble on the day of. Doing as much as you can in advance on 1 or 2 days can really save a lot of time.
Thank you. That's really helpful. The next question is one that comes up, Mary, a lot in cardiac rehab, and I love the brevity. What about eggs? So, Mary, what about eggs?
So eggs can be really healthy in the sense that they're a great source of protein. They're much better for you to eat than a donut at breakfast. But the tricky thing about eggs in certain populations, and unfortunately if my cardiac rehab patients are listening, you already know the answer. If you have heart disease, dyslipidemia, or diabetes, we really do recommend you still watch out for dietary cholesterol. It doesn't bump your cholesterol as much as that saturated fat I talked about, but it really is essential to kind of keep an eye on it in those certain populations. So if you like eggs, using 1 egg and 2 egg whites or egg beaters, it's about 3 yolks a week, or in that situation that we'd recommend keeping it to. So in a normal situation, if you don't have any heart disease or diabetes, an egg a day is really what they look at in terms of safety, in terms of including in your diet.
Thank you. Moving on now to another food that I like a lot. Are raw almonds good? Dr. Steinberg, you want to field this one?
Oh, sure. Or Mary maybe can.
So I'll do this
take
one because it's another one we talk a lot about in cardiac rehab. Raw almonds are amazing. I love the word raw in front of an almond because it signifies that there's not a lot of sodium in it. So that's one thing. If you're buying lightly salted almonds or mixed nuts, it tends to be a little bit higher in sodium. Almonds are a wonderful source of that omega-3 fatty acids and monounsaturated fats, things like that. So including almonds in your as a healthy snack is really quick. We've had a few questions talk about I don't like to cook, so using almonds, they're already prepared, super easy to add to a salad for a little bit of healthy fat or protein, so something that you can usually really bring in and use pretty easily. They are dense in terms of calories, so a serving's only 1/4 cup, so moderation is another thing if you're looking to lose weight or something like that. So.
And that's something that you could potentially portion out ahead of time, also to go back to some of that meal planning piece as well. And then in terms of food storage, I always say, just like I was talking about before, anything like a nut or a seed, you can store it at room temperature for a period of time, but if you wanted to buy it in bulk, you could freeze it for the longest shelf life.
So I'm happy with the answers. Both foods are great, but in moderation. The next question is a really interesting one. It's kind of a cooking question. What is the best, easiest way to remove the outer skin on beets? Chef Rick, I think this one's for you.
All right. Well, you can cut it raw and peel it with a knife. However, that is more dangerous. The easiest way to answer the question would be to roast it first, roast it whole, and then the skin will peel off very, very easily. And for the cleanliness of your oven and countertops, it is best to wrap a beet either in foil or put it on a baking sheet to make sure that when it bleeds out, it doesn't drip in your oven. So that's the easiest way.
Thank you, Chef. This next one is another good one for families with kids. Does blending whole fruit in a blender to make a smoothie eliminate or reduce the fiber usually associated with whole fruit? Dr. Steinberg, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can start, and then Mary, feel free to add in any other comments that you want to add. I think generally eating items whole is always preferred, but like you were saying with kids and families or people who are trying new foods for the first time, smoothies can be an efficient way to add a lot of different nutrients into them. So adding even leafy greens and plant-based sources of protein also. But to go to the fiber point specifically, it does sort of blend it up a little bit and does a little bit of the breakdown that your stomach might do. And so it just makes it a little bit easier for your body to digest. And you often sort of drink it faster than you might eat a piece of whole fruit. And so I usually say if you are going to be having a smoothie, making your own and being really conscientious about what you're putting in it. But anytime you can have a whole fruit instead of using a smoothie or sort of drinking the item, that's obviously preferred. Mary, anything else that you would add?
No, I think again you touched on it. It's more what's in the smoothie and the volume. So if you have a good source of protein, it does help slow down the digestion a little bit. Again, it's depending on what your medical history or what you're dealing with at home. If you have diabetes, it might not be the best thing to be doing. Maybe a smoothie bowl where you have some whole fruit with some of the smoothie blended up. But again, just good source of protein, lots of greens, good source of fruit, and then just check for added sugar, especially if you're not making them. If you're buying them in the grocery store, a lot of them have extra added sugar, and I wouldn't use a fruit juice in them. So even a skim milk, Greek yogurt, or a plant-based milk can be perfect. So.
Or you could add nuts to it also for extra fat too, in addition to the protein. That also will help slow down some of the digestion.
Or flax seeds.
Yeah,
flax seeds.
yeah, exactly. Omega-3s.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I was waiting for this question. Are any kinds of chocolate healthy? Mary, this one's yours.
Oh, this is so tricky because everyone wants me to say, yes, eat as much as you want. But guess what? It is, so dark chocolate has less sugar in it. It has those flavonoids in it. So that's the one that kind of touts some benefits to it. It's kind of like everything that we've already been talking about. It's moderation. When they look at the studies, it's a serving of dark chocolate that's healthy. It does have less, if it's darker, the more, it's 70% or higher that you want to look at because it has less sugar. It still has the cocoa butter in it, which is saturated, so calorically dense and a source of fat. So just, again, in moderation is key.
Okay.
So I often say too, if you are going to have it similar to the smoothie, maybe thinking about what else you could have with it that will sort of help slow down some of the digestion. So adding a piece of whole fruit, adding some other nuts or seeds, again for protein, fat, and fiber all at the same time.
And now we have a really practical question. Not everyone is a cook or even enjoys cooking. What do I do? Chef?
I guess that was a panel. So, as we talked about some of the items being prepackaged, if you're trying to find like pre-cooked beets or items of that nature, you can find things that are already cooked for you, and therefore you're not really cooking, you're more assembling. And that will take a lot of the kind of technical pieces out of it, and then you can still enjoy healthier options without having to go through all the labor.
And I'll add to that, one of those foundations I was talking about is salads. So you don't have to cook a salad. You can always buy romaine and arugula and spinach. Baby carrots, you don't have to cook. You can cut up a cucumber. You can open a can of beans and rinse them off and add them as a protein source. Another good source, like if you are in a store and they have a salad bar, you can pull some of the protein sources out if you don't cook. It is a 4-letter word in certain people's diet, repertoire of things, but you can get around not cooking. Making a really good relationship with a chef near you too. They can definitely do healthier items at a dining out facility. I had a guy in our cardiac rehab who didn't cook and he did really well. So again, it's getting kind of thinking outside the box in terms of what you can do.
And I think that's also where meal planning and prep can also come into play too. So just like you're talking about the shopping, so what do you have around in your kitchen, in your pantry, so that your go-to items are healthy and whole items will help a lot too with that assembly.
And there's nothing wrong with using frozen vegetables and canned products. I mean, again, I love fresh produce, but I rely on a lot of that because we're all busy, we're working. So I always have frozen broccoli, canned tomatoes, canned beans. In a pinch, I put them together and it makes a great meal. So you don't have to be as elaborate as we were tonight. We really wanted you to experience different foods and flavors and textures and see how colorful your plate can be. So it doesn't have to be as elaborate as tonight. So. And acorn squash, you can just roast it.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things. We could go on for days. Sorry, George.
That's okay. And the next question is, again, very common and quite important. Vegetable recommendations for a sensitive stomach. Dr. Steinberg, I'm going to shift this one over to you.
Yeah, so I usually think about items in well, it sort of depends. There's a few different categories of vegetables that I think can be difficult on people's stomachs and depending on their condition. So things in the cabbage family, also nightshades, so tomatoes and eggplants can be a little bit harsher for certain people. I think also how you prepare it can help sort of make it a little bit less harsh or lessen the discomfort associated with it. But one thing I will say is I rarely hear that leafy greens cause any problems for people with sensitive stomachs. So anytime you are trying to find a vegetable, definitely lean into the leafy greens. I think that would be really helpful. I don't know if Chef Rick or Mary have other things to add in terms of vegetables that are a little bit more gentle.
I think you covered it.
Yeah, anytime you're bringing fiber in, you want to do it really slow. So if you have been really following a restrictive diet for and whatever reason it is, and you want to bring vegetables in, or some of the recommendations we made tonight, is key to do it slow. Your digestive tract does have to adapt if it's not used to fiber.
Definitely.
There is a product called Beano that you can put on that helps break down some of the things that people are sensitive to that you can use, but going slow and steady wins the race. Like literally adding one vegetable a week in, and then lots of fluids. So lots of water can really help in that situation as well. There is a book recommended in the research guides that I highly recommend called Fiber Fueled. If you have had IBS or any types of issues and you want to get back to bringing in more whole foods, he has a cookbook and he goes step by step in terms of bringing some of these foods that you might actually be fearful of bringing back in because you've had so much problems with it. So lots of different resources out there. So check out the website.
Thank you, guys. That was really informative and really very interesting. We're ending up now, but we'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight. This was really fun. And remind you that you will all be receiving, I think via email, a copy of this presentation. I think the recipe, the wonderful recipe that you guys put together, and a link to our website, which again is filled with a lot of great resources. We invite you guys to go there. And with that, I'd like to sort of hand off to Dr. Errol Norwitz.
Thank you, George. So I'd like to bring this evening's event to a close by again thanking our presenters for a very informative and entertaining evening. And thank you for joining us this evening. Food as medicine remains a key strategic imperative for Newton-Wellesley, and we look forward to seeing you all again and hosting you for future events. I'd like to end by reiterating something Mary said earlier, which is the goal here is not short-term diet. It's really to change your relationship with food in order to build long-term sustainable metabolic health. That's the goal. And with that, thank you and good evening.
Good job.
Good job. Thank you.